If you had to pick one path to get rich, would you spend 5 to 6 years in medical school, or would you risk it all and start a business? Doctors typically graduate with 6 figures worth of debt, and they don't typically make 6 figures until their mid to late 30s. Whereas with an entrepreneur, it could go either way. They could either have a business that fails, or they can have a business that does extremely well and makes them a lot more money than their day job would. So in today's video, I want to navigate who gets the money faster. Is it your doctor who has a safe career, or is it your entrepreneur? And if you haven't met me before, hi, my name is Dr. Yosa, and I create content on money, personal finance, and property investing. So if you're interested in finding out the answer to the questions that I posed at the start, then stay tuned for the rest of this video. Okay, so round one, who makes more and when? So let's start with our doctors. Junior doctors will typically make between 32 to 45,000, but depending on their years of experience. And then when they become consultants, they will start to hit the 6-figure mark, but that can take up to 10 years depending on what trend and pathway you decide to go down in the UK. Now, one thing that I will add is that your pay is automatic as you progress through the different training bands. However, the downside of that is your income is capped. So unless you go into private work, or you have a side hustle, or you go into academia, or you're doing something creative, you typically won't make more than that pay band. And we also need to remember that we live in the UK, and when you reach a certain threshold, you will be at the higher tax band, and that will therefore affect your take home. And we also need to take into consideration as well pension contributions. So if we flip that to the other side with your entrepreneur, depending on the nature of the startup, your founders may not be taking home a salary, or they'll be taking home a very minimal salary whilst the business is starting out, in order to reinvest the money that they do have back into the business. However, the reality of that is it can change relatively quickly. Once a product market fit is established and the company is doing very well in selling its products or its services, then the salary of the CEO and the founding team can increase relatively quickly. And you could argue in those instances, how much money each member of the team is making is uncapped, because the potential of how much money that business can generate is uncapped. So although looking at those two arguments, it sounds like the entrepreneurial route is more lucrative from a financial perspective, we need to take into consideration that actually 95% of startups fail, and there is more risk at the start of the startup journey than there is later down the line as the business becomes more established. So the conclusion is, although doctors earn reliably earlier on, entrepreneurs can actually take longer to match the salaries of a doctor. However, once they have established a product market fit and their business is doing really well, they can completely outpace the earnings of a doctor. Round two, so when can you actually start building wealth? Again, we'll start off with the doctors. So most doctors typically start their career later in comparison to their non-doctor peers. We look at the duration of medical school in comparison to non-medical programs. And then if we look at how long it takes for you to become senior in the medical field compared to non-medical fields, again, that is a significant amount of time. So it is a common theme for doctors to kind of feel a little bit behind in comparison to their non-medical peers. Doctors who typically begin to amass wealth or start looking at investing tend to do it a lot later. Whereas if we compare that to an entrepreneur, you can be an entrepreneur at any age. If you have a dream and you have a problem that you're super passionate about, there isn't an age cutoff and there isn't a prerequisite. You don't need to go to university necessarily in order to carry out that solution and start that business. Whereas to be a doctor, you do need to go to university. So if you have an entrepreneur who went down the route of not going to university, or they went to university and they dropped out, but their business is super successful, they could take the funds from that business, they can reinvest it into their business, but they can also start making money in paying themselves a salary, and then using the money that they're paying themselves as a salary to invest in other things that can make them more money in the long term. So the conclusion to this point is, doctors build wealth later, but with a level of stability, whereas entrepreneurs can build wealth faster, but many of them won't due to the high nature of the startups failing. Round three, risk and security. So we're going to start with doctors. Doctors love to throw around the word of security, and I wouldn't just say doctors, but people in the healthcare profession generally speaking. And it's true, we saw this in the pandemic. Whilst other industries were experiencing changes to the job security of doctors were safe, and in times of recessions, again, the doctor job security is locked in. So you have the comfortability of knowing that every single month you're going to get a paycheck, and then on top of that, you've got a good pension scheme, you've got employer rights, and and you've got access to sick pay and all the other benefits of being an NHS doctor. And by being a doctor, it means that your skill sets are valued anywhere in the world. Although I will argue that if you did want to change career paths, it isn't as easy the further up the chain that you go. However, because you have a high level of security, in exchange, you get less flexibility and you get less income scalability. Whereas when we compare that to your entrepreneur may not take home a salary for a number of years, or may take home a small salary in order to reinvest everything into the business to ensure that it prospers and it doesn't fail. But in doing that, they also would be saying no to the things that we get when we are employed that we typically take for granted, such as having an employer pension, having sick pay, having health benefits, etc. But this changes very quickly once the business starts to do really well. As the business scales, you get your time freedom back and you can incorporate those things into the culture of the business and the things that the business offers to employers. So the conclusion of this round is, although doctors have job security, entrepreneurs will have access to freedom if their business makes it. So it depends what you value most. Do you value the security of something, or do you value having freedom to choose what you do with your time? Round 4, who scales faster? And I mean scale in the context of money. So we're going to start off with our doctors. Most doctors earn money by exchanging their time. And depending on the nature of their work, they might work 60 to 70 hour week. If you're exchanging your time for money, it gets to a stage where your time becomes a limitation factor, because it gets to a ceiling where you can't work more than a certain amount of time, and so your earning is capped. Most doctors won't have a scalable business because they already work so many hours in the week. They won't have the time to create a business that can scale, and that's where the difference is between a doctor and an entrepreneur. So an entrepreneur will have a business, and as that business is doing well, and we're gonna, for this context, assume the business is doing well, it will get to a stage where they can increase the growth of the company without having to increase how much time they put in, because they can take advantage of something known as leverage, and take advantage of this leverage in the form of people, by hiring more staff, by hiring people who are great at what they do. And if they have an exit strategy and they're able to sell the business, then they can make 6 to 7 figures quite quickly as a result of the sale. But that doesn't take into consideration how long it would take to build up the business to this point where it would be valuable to someone else to buy. Having something that scales is a complete game changer for the following reasons. Firstly, it decouples the link between time and money. Like I said, most people make money by exchanging their time, but if you have something that scales, it means that you create that one thing and it has the potential to make money again and again and again and again without you having to put more time into it. So in short, doctors accumulate, however entrepreneurs are able to scale, and that beats accumulation every time. And then the last round is lifestyle trade-off. When we look at doctors, they typically work long hours and they work antisocial hours. So they might be on call at night, they might work on the weekend, and as a result, they might miss things. They might miss a birthday, or they might miss a wedding, or they might miss family endeavors. And also, it is a very stressful job. And I'm not speaking for myself, but generally speaking, you are making high-stake decisions that are literally life and death decisions, and that can be tasking. So although it's a prestigious career and it's highly valued and people appreciate the importance of having doctors and other members of the healthcare professions in society, most doctors typically will retire in their late 60s, or depending on what the pensionable age is, they may retire sooner if they have investments, but that isn't all doctors, it's just some. Whereas if we flip the switch and we think about entrepreneurs, yes, it's also very high stress because there isn't anyone to protect you. As an entrepreneur, you are the heart of that business and you need to make sure it works because there isn't anyone to save you. However, if done right, if all the stars align, you get to decide what culture you want to implement in your company. And it isn't becoming uncommon nowadays for a lot of startups and companies to have an office, but also to have remote elements to it. So as long as people get their job done, they can be anywhere in the world. And with entrepreneurs, they have the potential to retire a lot earlier if they're able to exit their company sooner. And that isn't necessarily an option that doctors will have unless they've been strategic about investing from the very beginning. In short, I wouldn't say there's a right or wrong answer. I think it comes down to you and your temperament. With medicine, being a doctor, you get the stability, but with an entrepreneur, it's high risk, high reward, rewards and you get the option of freedom and possibilities that being a doctor may not necessarily give you in the same capacity. So that's my thoughts. Let me know what you think. Who do you think builds wealth faster? Is it doctors and people in the healthcare profession, or is it your entrepreneurs with crazy amazing startup ideas? Make sure to let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you've enjoyed it, and if you have not subscribed, make sure you do so you can join the family, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!